The courtroom was bathed in the soft, diffused light of a tempered afternoon, casting long shadows across the polished wooden floorboards as Judge Ebony K. Williams took her seat. She adjusted her robe with a practiced, elegant motion, her eyes scanning the room with an intensity that seemed to measure the very air. She was a woman of substance, a scholar of the law who carried the weight of her North Carolina roots and Louisiana upbringing with a grace that was underscored by a distinct West Coast cool and a sharp, unmistakable New York edge. Her presence was magnetic, a gravitational force that demanded truth and clarity in equal measure. She turned her gaze toward the plaintiff, Bradford Kingston, and the defendant, Leon Davis, who stood on opposite sides of the courtroom, each representing a world of conflict. The air was thick with unspoken tension, the kind that accumulates when personal pride clashes with professional obligation. Judge Williams began, her voice steady and resonant. She spoke of the foundational principles of the nation, words that hung in the quiet space: freedom and integrity. She reminded all present that her courtroom was a sanctuary for justice, a place where people from every walk of life, black, white, purple, gay, straight, and queer, could seek an equal playing field. It was the mission of her life, and it was the singular purpose of the court this day. Bradford Kingston, a man whose professional life was dedicated to the development and nurturing of children, had come to seek remedy for a perceived injustice. He stood tall, though his posture carried the fatigue of someone who had weathered a storm of baseless accusations. He claimed that his former employer, Leon Davis, had withheld his pay after accusing him of theft. Ms. Davis, the owner of a daycare facility where Mr. Kingston had been employed for approximately 2 months, stood her ground with a cold, detached air. She had countered the claim with a lawsuit of her own, demanding $3,854, alleging that Mr. Kingston had made off with valuable property, including a drivable toy car and a designer watch. The judge looked down at the documents before her, her expression unreadable. She motioned for Mr. Kingston to speak. He recounted his time at the daycare, a period that began with promise, but descended rapidly into hostility. He spoke of the subtle, yet biting, comments regarding his presence as the only male teacher in a facility staffed exclusively by women. He mentioned the underlying insinuation that his gender rendered him an anomaly, a suspicion that grew into an accusation of theft the moment items went missing. He spoke of his frustration, of the day he realized that trust had been eroded beyond repair, and how he had submitted his resignation, choosing to walk away from an environment that had become a minefield of prejudice. Ms. Davis, when invited to speak, remained steadfast in her convictions. She possessed no concrete evidence, only the firm, unshakable belief that Mr. Kingston was the only individual with the opportunity to commit the act. She presented grainy video footage, a series of images that showed Mr. Kingston performing his duties, decorating the classroom, moving about the space that was his place of work. She insisted that his presence in the room where the items vanished was proof of his guilt. Judge Williams watched the screen, her brow slightly furrowed as she observed the limited, circumstantial nature of the evidence. It was clear that the footage, while documenting Mr. Kingston's presence, did nothing to prove he had committed a crime. In a move to find the truth, the court had administered a polygraph test. The results were held in a sealed envelope, a source of truth that neither the plaintiff nor the defendant had seen. As the results were revealed, the room fell into a heavy, expectant silence. The polygraph, while not the absolute arbiter of reality, provided a compelling narrative. Mr. Kingston was telling the truth. He had not taken the car, nor had he taken the watch. Judge Williams addressed Ms. Davis, her tone stern and direct. She highlighted the danger of hasty judgment, the corrosive nature of prejudice, and the failure of the defendant to see past her own stereotypes. She noted the clear hostility that had permeated the workplace, a bias against men in childcare that Ms. Davis had allowed to dictate her professional conduct. The ruling was swift and final. Mr. Kingston was awarded the $3,000 in unpaid wages, his resignation justified by the hostile environment he had endured. Ms. Davis's counterclaim was dismissed in its entirety, as she had failed to provide a single shred of credible evidence to support her accusations. As the court adjourned, the air in the room felt slightly lighter, cleansed by the truth. However, the day was far from over. The second case of the day brought forth a different set of tensions, centered on the collision of vanity, friendship, and the impulsive nature of human conflict. Melissa Craig, the plaintiff, stood before the bench, her face a mask of indignation. She was suing her neighbor, Sasha Griffin, for $600, claiming that a ruined luxury blouse was the result of a jealous act. The story unfolded with a touch of light-hearted absurdity. The two women, who were friends through the shared connection of their sons, had been at a celebratory dinner when the incident occurred. Ms. Craig, proud of her recent physical transformation, had been eager to discuss her new appearance. She had chosen an ivory, designer blouse for the occasion, a garment she had never before had the chance to wear. As the evening progressed, the conversation turned to the details of her procedure. When questions arose regarding her physical changes, Ms. Craig had, in a moment of questionable judgment, unbuttoned the top buttons of her blouse to illustrate the results of her surgery. She maintained that it was a modest gesture, a small peek into the success of her transformation. Ms. Griffin, however, had perceived the act differently. She claimed she had intervened to restore a sense of decency to the dinner, tossing her jacket, a garment of vegan leather, at Ms. Craig. In the ensuing exchange, a glass of wine was spilled, ruining the ivory blouse beyond salvage. The courtroom became a space of bemused reflection as the judge examined the garment, the red stain serving as a testament to the night's folly. The judge listened as the two women traded accusations, each convinced of the righteousness of her position. Ms. Craig felt ostracized and judged, her pride wounded by the loss of her garment and the friction within her friend group. Ms. Griffin remained convinced that her actions were a necessary intervention, a way to protect the social decorum of the restaurant. Judge Williams looked at the two women, the weight of their petty grievances clashing with the gravity of the legal process. She delivered her verdict with a mixture of patience and firm authority. She ruled in favor of Ms. Craig, noting that Ms. Griffin had no mandate to police the attire or the choices of another individual. The causal link between the tossing of the jacket and the ruin of the blouse was clear, and the responsibility for the damage rested firmly with the defendant. The case was settled, the compensation ordered, and the two neighbors were left to navigate the wreckage of their friendship on their own terms. As the session concluded, the courtroom emptied, the quiet returning once more to the space that had served as the theater for two very different, yet fundamentally human, dramas of conflict and resolution. It was a day of lessons learned, a day where the law had stood as a mirror to the prejudices and impulses of those who passed before it, seeking not just a ruling, but perhaps, in the end, a measure of understanding.